Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about cybersecurity, why it's important to synchronize security across environments, and the role of artificial intelligence in cybersecurity. Some big topics indeed. To discuss that, I'm joined by Joe Levy, Chief Technology Officer at Sophos. Joe, happy Friday to you, and thanks for joining us today.
Hello, James. Happy Friday to you too. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, great. So I've got some important in-depth questions which I wrote myself. I want to ask them to you. Before we get into the specifics, I'd like to get your sense of what sort of the overall trends, one or two trends that are driving security this year. And if I may point out one myself, it feels like companies are in almost a quasi panic in that we're not necessarily winning the battle against hackers this year. I mean, the ransomware, criminals, the hackers, the people that are stealing data. I'm not sure it might be like hackers one, companies zero sometimes, I think. So first of all, do you share my dour assessment or what's driving security this year?
Yeah, it's true, James. You can certainly get that feeling. There are some clear themes, and perhaps the most prevalent among them is just the sheer number of headlines that we're seeing today about ransomware attacks and data breaches, often with very serious and dire consequences for the victims. There have been instances where companies have been put out of business. Recently, we had a major headline in the news where there was felony prosecution against a security leader within a very major organization because of the way that organization chose to handle a data breach.
Wow.
So yeah, these are some very real consequences that we're dealing with beyond just a disruption to business. That's a very important driver within the industry, though, for something positive. And that is just the amount of awareness that we're seeing around the importance of treating cybersecurity with kind of a maturity that we historically haven't. And we're to the point now where we're beginning to think about cybersecurity more about a risk and governance issue rather than just a technological solution. We recognize that we actually have to get people and process into the loop as well as the technology itself. Something we've been talking about for many, many years within the industry now, but we're actually starting to see a good reaction to this just based on the sheer number of the headlines that we're seeing. The other really positive movement that we have going for us right now is government, particularly in the United States, seems to have gotten serious about cybersecurity. So we had the Biden administration's executive order a little earlier this year, and there were some key areas that they began to focus on. This is an advisory to everyone operating in the public sector, to the private sector as well, that there are certain things that we need to start taking really seriously. So just to recap, key among them, we have a focus on multi-factor authentication, just the recognition that passwords alone aren't going to do it for us anymore, and we need to ensure that we're protecting our identities and protecting our systems. Further, we talk a lot about zero trust as a philosophy and an architecture for the way that we're building our systems today. And this is just an adoption of a policy that's been around for a very, very long time. And basically what it says is that you're going to have complete mediation for access to all of the systems that you're going to allow your users to be interacting with. Now, a lot of the other headlines that we've seen, they've been driven by supply chain attacks. So supply chain integrity issues where an attacker could get into the software manufacturing pipeline. We've seen, unfortunately, multiple severe instances of this over the past few years. So concerns around like the provenance of the software, where it's coming from, transparency into the composition of these complex software stacks that we're running, whether it's something that we're running on-prem or something that's running in the cloud. A lot of conversations about SBOM, software bill of materials, so that we can get that kind of the transparency into what it is that our software is composed of today. And then we've also got general concerns around observability, detection, and response. Do we actually have the technologies, and do we have the processes and the people and the staffing in place in order for us to be able to detect something once it's occurred? Again, prevention is wonderful, and it's going to work a vast majority of the time, but there are always going to be instances where prevention is going to fail us, and we need to make sure that we've got the detection and response capabilities. Now, all of this is underpinned by the cybersecurity skills shortage, which is something we've been talking about for years. And we're not going to solve this by throwing more people at the problem alone. Of course, more people, more training, more staffing is going to be part of the solution. But this is one of the primary drivers for the interest that we're seeing in the industry around enablers like AI and automation. And then on the topic of AI, I think that if you just take the temperature in the room around some of the cybersecurity conferences, major conferences like RSA conference, Black Hat, we've perhaps reached this point of peak AI in the industry. And this is basically another way of saying that perhaps the cybersecurity industry has been a little bit all hat and no cattle. So we have a little bit of a credibility issue that I think we need to tackle, and we're at the early stages of recovering from maybe an overconfidence in AI in the earlier stages, and now we need to backfill that with some substance.
I think it's a fascinating comment, the idea of all hat and no cattle in terms of AI. And it does feel like the cybersecurity industry has rushed to say, hey, there may be problems, but we're developing AI. We have AI, and it's gonna help solve those problems. It seems like from the buyer's perspective, one of the issues they face is we buyers. I'll put myself in their seat for a moment. We buyers don't really know how to kick the tires when it comes to the AI components of a certain vendor. Like a vendor tells us we've got AI, but how do we really know? And it's it's a little black box. And it's slightly off the topic, but any advice you'd say? There's someone out there. There's a company who's shopping for a solution. They know they need AI in their cybersecurity solution. How do they evaluate the AI of a certain vendor, given the hat and cattle comment that you just made?
That is a wonderful question, and I'm glad we're starting to have this conversation in the industry today. Our lives are just surrounded by AI. It's pervasive at this point. And you could look at all of the other areas in our lives where AI has been adopted, and we just sort of take it for granted as a component of what we do. It's present in social networks, and when we go to shopping sites and the recommendation engines that we see. We've seen some pretty cool image generation where you can take like a prompt in text and it will actually generate this highly stylized image with just this uncanny sort of reality to it. We see it in coding recommendation with things like GitHub Copilot. We see it with self-driving cars. Cybersecurity seems to be behind all of these other industries, though, and it's taken this position over the years of being very defensive, very secretive, and very difficult to measure. So it's great that we're starting to have this conversation of how do we have a conversation with our vendors when they're making claims around capabilities in AI. And this is something that we've been tackling for a number of years here at Sophos. We believe in sort of a radical transparency when it comes to talking about the way that we do design. So we have this resource that's available, for example. It's ai.sophos.com. It's a website that you can go to. We publish all of our white papers there, all of our methodologies, the design practices, examples of all the models that we have in production today. We talk about how we build them. We talk about how we measure them. We did a talk at this past RSA Security Conference in 2022, where we attempted to demystify AI claims. The title of the talk was Assessing Vendor AI Claims Like a Data Scientist, Even If You Aren't One. So it's one that I encourage viewers to catch. It's available on the RSA website.
Okay.
And we think that practicality is the solution here. AI should not be some collection of arcane math where a vendor says to a customer, just trust the math. It's too complicated. It's a black box.
Right.
Discuss it with you. It will reveal too much of our intellectual property. That's not the basis for a credible conversation. When we talk about it, we need to talk about it in practical terms. We need to say, like, how are you as a vendor collecting real world representative data? How are you ensuring that you've got the right kind of diversity and the right kind of volume of the data that you're collecting to construct your models? We want to talk about well-reasoned selection of well-understood peer-reviewed algorithms. So it's not a matter of using the most sophisticated or the most cutting-edge set of algorithms, but can I go to the Wikipedia site and can I read up on this algorithm that you're describing? One of the biggest problems that we face in AI is just getting well-labeled data. And if you look at something like image prediction, for example, there's a lot of good corpus of material that's out there that are used as standard data sets that everyone in the industry can use. And when you've got this standard data set that you could use, it allows all boats to rise with the tide, because you get a lot of collaboration, you get a lot of competition. This is something that really hadn't existed in cybersecurity. So one of the things that we did, along with one of our technology partners, Reversing Labs, is we created what has become one of the authoritative data sets in the industry. It's called SOREL 20, and it's a body of portable executables that anyone who's interested in producing an ML model to predict malicious executables can use for their training. So now we've got this kind of standardization with very, very highly curated, well-labeled information. We also need to make sure that these things work. Like, once we put these models into production, how are we measuring their efficacy? How are we measuring their true positive and their false positive rates? So when a vendor makes a claim that they've produced a kind of an AI, it's essential that we ask them questions like, well, how are you actually measuring the efficacy of these things? What are you doing for the purpose of evaluation and calibration of the models that you're producing? And then if you think about the way that
Can I interrupt on that? Just because
yeah,
it's a fascinating, because I think that in particular, that idea of how are you doing, you're almost talking about the idea of benchmarks, but is there such a thing, and I honestly don't know, is there such a thing as benchmarks that independently generated benchmarks that buyers can look at to go, oh, this person caught X amount of, this company bought X amount of, caught X amount of alerts, this company caught even more, some of them were false alerts. Do those benchmarks exist?
These benchmarks exist within the industry. So there's third-party testing that exists for catch rates within endpoint protection products, for example. Okay. There are benchmarks for network security products. Many of the technologies that provide these protection and detection engines have AI as a component. Again, it tends to remain a black box because there's infrequently a differentiation between the underlying engine that produced that detection. So we can't say, for example, that it was a signature, or it was a heuristic, or it was behavioral logic that was producing that detection versus AI. Now, we believe in producing labeling around the provenance of the detection within our engine, so we'll let you know when it's the AI that's actually producing the detection. But the general guidance here is your mileage may vary because it's going to vary wildly from one user environment to another. It's going to depend on the kind of data that the model is encountering. So this is why it's really important for any vendors who's producing an AI system. They need to provide a kind of a feedback mechanism within the interface itself so that users can let the model know how it's performing. It's sort of like you pat it on the head when it does well and you kind of give it a shove when it doesn't do well. We need to have those feedback mechanisms in the products that we're building. This is something that we've done from the start because we believe that it's critical to producing these kinds of calibrations. And it's critical to producing the next generation of the model. This is how we know how it performs. This is how we know what we have to improve in the next generation that we're going to produce. Building that into the fabric of the design itself, rather than something that you try to produce as an overlay, is just an indication of a well-designed AI product. And then last but not least, like many of us have cars now that have some degree of self-driving in them. They'll do like adaptive cruise control, or they'll do like lane assist so you don't drift out of your lane too much. Mm-hmm. Some of them, they have a visualization of what it is that the car is seeing, and the car attempts to represent graphically what it sees in the road. Like, does it see a car? Does it see a motorcycle? Does it see a bicycle? Sure. It's interesting to watch the way that these things operate because they produce a lot of errors. Just from observation, you can notice that they produce errors. Okay. When it's something like a self-driving car that's doing it, we've already had these philosophical trolley car conversations around if you're in a self-driving car and the car needs to decide between hitting a pedestrian or driving off the edge of a cliff. Right. What decision is it going to make? So crisis response is really important. Crisis response will determine what happens when the AI isn't operating the way that you would expect it to, and what mechanism does the vendor have to suppress that crisis operation that's happening. So again, these are just examples of the kinds of topics that customers should be discussing with their AI vendors when a vendor makes a claim about performing AI work. You know, getting to the car example, it seems ultimately we need to teach our AI deployments morality and nuance to make those kind of decisions. It could be a tough thing to teach an AI deployment. It's true. I think we've got a little while to go before we can start enlisting it in these sort of philosophical debates. Indeed. You've talked about companies synchronizing their security across environments. You touched on that. Why is that important? What does that mean exactly, and why is that important? Yeah, so look at modern IT operations today. So organizations of all shapes and sizes are constructing and operating within increasingly complex environments. We all deal with vendor sprawl. The advent of software as a security, software as a service has kind of driven this as well. It's very, very easy to sign up a new vendor and then to connect these vendors up through a set of APIs. Many of us have moved components of our operations into the cloud. Some of us have moved all of our operations into the cloud. So now we've got all of these systems that are interconnecting with each other, and it's usually at the interfaces that security concerns lurk. we have this accompanying recognition that point product technologies like just the endpoint or just the firewall or just the MDM solution, they're not going to do the job anymore. Like we're mature enough in our understanding that the days of set it and forget it security are far behind us.
Mm-hmm.
We have some hope in some emerging technologies that just do a better job unifying these operating environments. They can operate better across domains. They can operate across different technology stacks. One example of a technology like this is called XDR, Extended Detection and Response. It's
Right.
kind of the evolution of the endpoint security industry.
It feels like XDR is still on a new, it's still newish and not really fully established. Agree, disagree?
It is emergent. Yeah, it's fair
Yeah.
to call it that.
Right.
It's, you know, you can measure on one hand the number of years that it's really been around in any kind of a meaningful way. But
Right.
it's a very exciting technology because it attempts to solve this problem that I'm describing of cross-domain, many interfaces, many systems, many vendors. The thing is, in order to really extract value from this kind of technology, it requires a pretty significant skill set. So you have to have human operators that are sitting at the console, and this becomes an always-on activity. Like I like to refer to cybersecurity as a 24/7 interactive sport because
Right.
attackers are going to look for the most opportune moment for themselves where they're going to launch an attack against a victim. And oftentimes it's going to be on the weekend, it's going to be over holidays, it's going to be at 3 o'clock in the morning. So that they're looking for the best opportunity for their success, which is the worst opportunity for your success.
Mm-hmm.
So security operations have to be always on. They have to be able to operate across all of these domains. And some organizations are equipped to do this on their own, but others aren't. In fact, most probably aren't. Most aren't able to assemble the sort of skills necessary and to develop the sort of mature security operations to really extract the value from this technology. So the most important thing for them, I would say, is have a strategy for how to address this. And the strategy could be that you do this in-house. It could be an in-house investment in the evaluation of all the right technologies, the implementation of the technologies, hiring the talent, training the talent, retaining the talent, sourcing all the threat intelligence that you need, building the detection and response playbooks, having your incident response plans put together, having the relationships with your cyber insurance companies and your breach coaches. It's pretty complicated. And the alternative there, of course, is selecting and aligning yourself with a set of vendors and service providers who can do this for you as a kind of a service. So that's the critical decision, just knowing at a high level what your strategy is and then making the investment in that strategy.
I love the idea of having a breach coach. I'd never heard of the idea of having a breach coach. I think maybe many of us need a breach coach in today's world, but good to know they're out there. I want to make sure you
hopefully very few of us need the actual coach. It's good to know who to call, but
right.
you don't want to call them frequently.
You have definitely touched on this, but I want to make sure I give you a chance in terms of how Sophos is addressing the security needs of its clients. Is there one big central point that you could sort of briefly give us? What is a Sophos Advantage?
Yeah, so again, we're dealing with very complex environments with a lot of moving parts. We want to make sure that we're eliminating blind spots. Blind spots continue to be one of the biggest issues that we have. It's not always the system that you knew about that was properly configured. It's the system that you didn't know about that provides a foothold for an attacker to be able to get into a network. And we need to span across all the operating domains that we're in today. So this means that we need to have a good operational presence and good visibility on endpoint, network, collaboration, cloud, and then identity kind of slices across all of these things. So we need to complement this with robust threat intelligence, and having the threat intelligence is one thing, being able to operationalize the threat intelligence in a meaningful time frame is another. So this is where operations like Sophos XOps, which is our global threat intelligence operation, can produce the threat intelligence across the domain, working across our Sophos Labs operation, our Sophos AI team, our Sophos security operations team that drives our managed detection and response operation, and then our internal security operation practice, because again, getting back to those supply chain concerns, you need to make sure that your vendor is doing the right things to keep themselves secure. Because if you're putting your eggs in that basket, you want to make sure that that basket is a good one. So last but not least, we have to have the people who are able to drive these architectures. We have to remind ourselves that we're often facing a human adversary on the other side of an attack. They're trying to exploit our systems, they're trying to exploit our processes and our people. So it's a real life, real time kind of red team versus blue team exercise that we're frequently engaged in. And this kind of hand-to-hand combat requires skills to really extract the value out of the technologies that we're investing in. Again, many of our customers are equipped to do this themselves, and they choose to do it themselves. They have 24/7 security operations, global coverage, but the vast majority of organizations out there, particularly smaller businesses, they would rather run their business. They would rather pay attention to running their state and local government interests, their schools, rather than trying to become cybersecurity experts. So for them, what we do is we give the best technology that we can to our customers who want to run these operations themselves. And we run the very same technology ourselves for the provision of our managed detection and response service. So managed detection and response, you could effectively think of this as cybersecurity as a service where you can turn controls over to Sophos. We'll provide the technology stack. We'll work with all of the vendors that you've already got in your ecosystem, and we'll deliver a modern multi-vendor, multi-domain security operation for our customers.
All right, it sounds promising. On that note, okay, I'd like to look at today, then look to tomorrow, the future of cybersecurity. I can almost conjure an optimistic view in that, say XDR gets to be mature and widely deployed. We've got zero trust, networks. We've got artificial intelligence that has actually been trained and has gone through several iterations. We've got maybe a few more cybersecurity pros in place, and even that we've got the staffers, we've got them fully trained. It seems like we could almost create an infrastructure that is fairly well secure, maybe just a little leak here and there, but generally pretty darn just secure. First of all, will that come to pass? And if not, what will things look like, say, the middle of the decade or so in security?
Yeah, so just getting back to the opening, James, you noted all the dire headlines that we're seeing today. Again,
right.
the silver lining to that is it really is driving awareness. So we're beginning to see, as a consequence, a lot of the low-hanging fruit is being addressed. So organizations are doing things like implementing multi-factor authentication, setting up zero trust network access in place of VPN. They're doing things like closing RDP ports that are exposed to the internet. There's a lot of a reduction of the surface area that is exposed today, and that trend is going to continue. So I think we're just going to continue to see a reduction in the surface area that many organizations are presenting to the internet, just based on the awareness that's being driven by all of these headlines. Our understanding about how to approach cybersecurity is going to continue to mature. We're going to stop treating it so much as the next shiny object, the next new technology that's going to be the savior and the hope for how we're going to remediate all of these issues and mitigate all this risk. We're going to take a more risk-centric approach. This is going to drive different kinds of relationships with cybersecurity vendors and with service providers. I think that we're going to see more consultative engagements, more trusted advisor kind of relationships with the most competent vendors and the most competent service providers that are out there today. We're all dealing with the cybersecurity skill shortage, and as vendors continue to staff up in the provision of this sort of cybersecurity services model, we're competing for the same talent that some of our customers are competing with. So we're going to have to make sure that we get economies of scale out of that, and we absolutely believe that we can do that. The other thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to make the people that we have more efficient. And we're going to continue to rely on advancements in AI and automation in order to be able to do that. I think we're going to get through this sort of confidence crisis that we have in AI today. We're going to see more vendors operating transparently the way that Sophos has done. I think we set a very good example in this respect. And we're going to start making strides toward this vision of what we describe as an AI-assisted SOC. I want to be very, very careful not to say an AI-driven SOC. I don't believe that, a lot of times we're going to get to the point where we're going to be able to turn it over to an AI entirely.
Right.
We always want to have a human in the loop. These things they're just too important to relegate entirely to an AI, at least current generation or even the next generation of AI. So let's make sure that we're using the predictions and the recommendations and the sort of conveniences like clustering that AIs can produce today to make the people that we have more efficient. And this means that we can reduce the sort of roteness of the tasks that they're performing, like within the operation of a SOC, for example. You're going to see a distribution of tasks that are performed. Some tasks are going to be performed way more than others. let's see what we can do to automate those. Because if we can automate the more rote tasks, number one, we free up the time and the attention of the human to do more important things. Number two, we also reduce the potential for error. Because when you're doing things repetitively, your brain tends to go on autopilot, and problems occur when you're on autopilot. Like, you know,
Right.
you're driving to a destination that you've gone to 100 times and your mind drifts and you miss your exit, that sort of
Sure.
thing. You don't want
Right.
this happening in operation. There's some very good promise that we're seeing from these large transformer models that are out there today. Like, I think everybody has probably seen examples of either Copilot or OpenAI or GPT-3. Like, it's very, very promising what the technology can do. And then probably the most practical way, I think, that customers are going to increasingly deal with and become better at cybersecurity is going to be through the consumption of cybersecurity as a service. A good metaphor to use here is as we've moved from data centers or servers in our server closets into cloud operations, we get the benefit of all the services that an AWS or an Azure or GCP provides. One of the things that they do under the hood, though, is transparent upgrades. So the thing that you can count on is they're always going to be upgrading the hardware. So you're always going to be getting the cutting edge, riding Moore's law curve of ensuring that dollar for dollar, you're getting the best compute you could possibly get. They're also handling things like updating the version of the open source software that they built their service on. They're doing the patching for you. So there's a lot of behind the scenes benefit that we get from the as a service model. And the same is absolutely true within cybersecurity as a service. Cybersecurity as a service is ensuring that you're getting the best technology, you're getting the best talent, you're getting the best training, you're getting the best operating procedures, you're getting the best incident response and remediation and containment plans. So I think it's a model that's just going to become more and more popular over the years.
Briefly then, you talk about the hyperscalers, and they're doing some of that with software and hardware. Are some of the more independent vendors, say Sophos, for example, are also offering a hardware foundation that they upgrade on a consistent basis?
Hardware as a service is something that's been present in the industry for a small number of years now. It's a model that is probably going to become increasingly prevalent. We're going to see a couple of things happen. Vendors are going to move toward, I'll use as an example, a firewall as a service model. Right. The other thing that we're doing is in many environments, we're eliminating the need for a hardware firewall. We're providing the entire firewall functionality stack as a service within the cloud. So I think we're going to see both of those models continue to displace hardware.
Interesting. Okay. Joe, I think you said it. Wow, that's fascinating. You know, it's going to be interesting to follow in the years ahead. There's going to be a lot going on. Thank you so much for sharing your insight today.
Yeah, James, it was a pleasure. It was great to talk to you.